In the busy city of New York City, the year 1997 marked the start of a time of peace and wealth that had never been seen before. The glass sides of the skyscrapers, which reached up to the sky, reflected the bright flashing lights of the ads. Hover cars flew through the skyways and between the buildings with a ballet-like accuracy that could only be made possible by the newest anti-gravity technology. On this particular afternoon, the city was bustling with business and conversation as normal. The people who lived there had no idea what terrible things were about to happen. A huge Crateron spaceship was hovering high above Earth. It was hidden by advanced stealth technology. The Craterons, a military race known for taking over other star empires brutally, planned to use Earth as a strategic hub in their latest war against that empire. The plan was easy. Just drop off a bunch of mutant warbeasts on a nearby planet that no one else lives on so they can be used as shock troops in a fight that's coming up. However, the ship was directly above Earth because of a terrible navigating mistake. Zorak, an elderly Kurtoran who was in charge of the ship, paced the bridge. As he yelled directions at his workers, the harsh lighting made his rough skin shine. The team was trained to be quick, but not to know how to navigate between stars. They made a mistake with their path, which put them dangerously close to Earth's orbit. "Please confirm the drop's locations," Zorak demanded, his voice a rough rumble. A mechanic who was nervous did what was asked, slamming his claws against the control panel. "The coordinates are locked, but, sir, they point to a populated area on Earth, especially New York City." Zorak growled and his eyes got very narrow. "Not important. Go ahead and drop it. The beasts need to be tested in a place with people anyway. It will give the war effort useful information." As soon as the order was sent, the Crateran ship's belly opened, sending dozens of containment boxes hurtling toward Earth. The smooth, almost invisible pods hurtled through the atmosphere, and Earth's primitive instruments didn't even notice as they fell. People in New York went about their daily lives below, unaware of the risk. The pods hit different places, like Central Park, Times Square, and the banks of the Hudson River. When they hit, the pods opened, letting the mutant warbeasts out. The monsters were more than 10 feet tall and had hardened skin that sparkled like wet tar. They looked around at their new surroundings with low growls in their mouths, and their eyes were a dark, evil red. Each beast had its own special skills. Some of them breathed fire, while others had limbs that could change into dangerous weapons. They were all driven by a deep-seated desire to hurt and kill. The first screams came from the beasts as they went on the attack and tore through the city streets with absolute fury. People ran away in fear as cars were thrown around like toys and buildings were torn apart. The city fell into chaos in a matter of minutes. The alien invaders had a lot more power than the local officials, so they rushed to defend themselves. The attack's news spread like wildfire, hitting every corner of the world and shaking people out of their comfort zones. The rest of the world was shocked, but a young chemist named Elara was feeling something different. Determination. From the window of her lab, she could see the destruction, and she knew that the only way to stop these beasts was to understand them. She took her study tools and went into the chaos because she was determined to stop this unplanned war. This was the start of the fight for life against the threat from beyond the stars. It would test how creative and brave people could be in the face of total destruction. New York City was completely in a state of chaos. Before, the streets were full of people laughing and doing business. Now, they were filled with the roars of Crateran war animals and the screams of people running away. The creatures tore through the city, turning skyscrapers, which are a testament to how smart people are at building, into mere obstacles. The New York Police Department and the Earth Defense Force were quick to react, even though they hadn't been trained for an enemy like this anyhow. The animals were not only very dangerous, but they were also very smart and able to change their minds. Each fight taught the creatures more about how people fight, and they learned to counter moves quickly and effectively. The first reaction was led by Captain Lana Rhodes of the EDF. As a police officer with years of experience fighting in cities, she knew that regular guns would not work against such strong enemies. It was clear what she wanted: get the people out of the way and only used heavy weapons to fight the beasts. Lana told her Delta team, "Get those civilians off the Lower East Side right now," through her communicator. She watched through her tactical visor as her orders were carefully carried out. "Good job, team. Set up the sound guns. We need to keep them away from places where people live." As the EDF and NYPD worked together, Homemade barriers were put up and sonic cannons, which are usually used to control crowds, were turned into something else to try and confuse the beasts. There were some creatures that were temporarily stopped by the high-frequency sound waves, which hurt and confused them. At the same time, Elara, the young scientist, was navigating the confusion with a portable genetic analyzer in her hand. Her goal was to get close enough to one of the animals to get a DNA sample without getting hurt herself. As she got closer to Times Square, she saw that one of the beasts was alone with another one. This was her chance. Elara made her way toward a side street that the beast had temporarily left, dodging broken objects and scared people. She quickly sent out a drone that buzzed toward the monster and expertly maneuvered around its huge body to collect skin cells from cuts and scrapes caused by the fight. Just as the drone came back, a nearby sonic gun went off, throwing the beast off balance for a moment. Elara quickly went back to her mobile lab, which was a reinforced van parked just outside the main battle zone, to make sure the sample was safe. She was thinking of all the things that could happen as she got the sample ready for analysis. What could be their weak point? How could this DNA data change things? When they got back to the streets, Captain Rhodes saw how well the sonic guns worked and made a decision. She told them to raise the frequency and intensity and then push them back. After the first blast, the second one was stronger and drove some of the animals to places with fewer people so they could be dealt with more safely. As the day went on, the fight went on. It looked like every time one animal died, a new one would appear, each one more dangerous than the last. Even though the chances were against them, the NYPD and EDF worked together to save thousands of lives by getting civilians to underground shelters and buildings that were fortified. The city looked very sad as the sun went down over it. New York was under attack, and large parts of the city were in ruins or very close to falling apart. In the middle of the destruction, there was still a small bit of hope. It was late at night, and Elara was almost done with a big breakthrough that could change the course of the fight. Her research showed an important fact about the beast's genes, a possible weakness that could be used against it. Now that they knew this, the fight was about to change, one that could help take back the city and maybe even save the world from an alien threat that had literally landed in their own neighborhood. As night fell over a trapped New York City, the streets, which had once been full of life, were now empty shells that echoed with the roars of the war beasts. The infrastructure of the city was badly damaged, and the shock of the invasion had turned into grim resolve among the survivors. Marcus was one of the survivors. He was a retired EDF sergeant in his late 50s, and as he looked around at the chaos, his military reflexes kicked in. He turned his Queen's home into a makeshift command center and called on neighbors, police officers, and anyone else who was ready to fight back. Marcus quickly set up a network of resistance cells all over the borough thanks to his years of hard-won experience and natural ability to lead. Marcus spoke to a group of about 30 men and women in his garage, which was now filled with maps and digital screens showing live feeds from different parts of the city. There is more that needs to be done by the troops. The fact that we know these places better than anyone else gives us an edge. Marcus's group started attacking the war beasts in a hit-and-run style with tools they found or made themselves. They mostly focused on luring the creatures into ambush spots where they could use homemade bombs to great effect. Each successful attack gave the resistance fighters new skills and boosted their confidence. At the same time, Elara the chemist kept working on the genetic sample she had gathered. Her research had found an unusual oddity in the animal's DNA, a certain genetic sequence that seemed to control how aggressive they were. When she realized how useful her finding could be, she contacted Dr., her old professor. Heinrich was an expert in genetic engineering. "Hey, doctor." Heinrich replied with great interest from a safe lab in upstate New York. He told Elara over a private video link that if she was right, they might be able to make a pheromone that would change how aggressive they are, make them less coordinated, or even make them turn on each other. Back in the city, Marcus's resistance grew in size and skill, and they started to work together more closely with the dying EDF and NYPD. Captain Lana Rhodes knew how useful the citizen militia was, so she gave Marcus tactical support and information to make the militia work together against the beasts. The actions of the resistance started to really make a difference. Marcus's team did a special job where they brought 3 of the war beasts into Central Park and set up explosives and sonic traps on the Great Lawn. The fight that followed was fierce and expensive, but in the end, the beasts were defeated, protecting a large part of the city and making a temporary safe zone possible. This win was very important. The good news about the operation quickly spread, which raised spirit in the city and encouraged other civilian groups to get together and fight back. Marcus's plan to fight the beasts with guerrilla tactics spread as an example of how to resist in New York. Alara and Dr. Heinrich worked non-stop on the pheromone project, racing against time to make a new tool in the fight for humanity's survival, while Marcus and Lana planned the next big operation. The risks were high, but New Yorkers and people in general were determined to take back their city from the aliens. It was pretty safe for Alara to work on her genetic research in her mobile lab, which was parked in an underground bunker that used to be a parking lot. In the dim light, the walls around her were covered with diagrams and genetic patterns that gave off a soft glow. The data that was streaming across her screens was a flood of genetic markers and oddities taken from the Warbeasts. Her eyes were tired but determined as they looked at it. Alara's big step forward came as a surprise. She found a receptor in the beast's DNA that seemed to be very sensitive to certain high-frequency sound waves while she was studying its DNA. This finding was made by accident when the creature's genetic information was compared to databases of known species. It had the ability to change everything. Alara thought to herself, this could be it. She adjusted her glasses while writing a long report about what she had found. She thought that if a perfectly tuned sound device was used to hit this receptor, it might be possible to confuse or even knock out the beasts. She called Doctor because she was eager to share this important finding. Heinrich and Captain Rhodes threw a safe way to talk to each other. I found something. That might be a weakness in the beasts. Their senses are connected to it, and with the right tools, we might be able to use this to our advantage, she said, her voice a mix of joy and exhaustion. Captain Rhodes, who had been in charge of coordinating defense operations across the whole city, replied with cautious optimism. That looks good, Alara. I'll make plans for you to give this to the EDF Tech Division first thing in the morning. We need every kind of help we can get. While this was going on, Dr. Heinrich was already thinking about what this finding could mean. Alara, if you can make this sound gadget better, we could use it to study the beasts and protect ourselves at the same time. Think about what we could find out about their genes. The next morning, Alara went to the EDF headquarters, which was one of the few buildings that was mostly still standing. It was a highly fortified area. She told a group of top military scientists and strategists about her results in a makeshift command center that was busy with military activity. Alara showed how the sound device could work by using detailed simulations and genetic charts. The device would send out a range of high-frequency sound waves that would connect with the beast's unique genetic receptor. In theory, this would make their sensory circuits overworked, which could make them confused or temporarily unable to move. At first, the military wasn't sure about it, but they needed a new plan badly. They agreed to give Alara's data a close look and ask a lot of questions before setting aside resources to make a prototype of the sound weapon. A group of the best engineers was put together to work with Alara and make her theory model into a real device. Over the next few weeks, Alara and the tech team worked non-stop to test and improve the sonic emitter. To make sure the gadget worked and could reach far, they did controlled experiments, first in the lab with small models, and then in the field with smaller biological specimens. Marcus learned about this new development at the same time and got his resistance troops ready to use the sonic weapons. They practiced and came up with new strategies that would work with the sound emitter's effects. Both the EDF and the resistance fighters were getting more and more excited as the prototype got closer to being finished. This device wasn't just a possible turning point in the battle. It was also proof of how creative and tough people can be when faced with an alien threat that seems impossible to stop. Even though the city was hurt and scarred, it got ready for the next part of the war with new hope. Alara watched as the first group of sonic emitters was sent to the front lines, ready to test her finding in the middle of battle. Her face showed that she was both tired from the long nights and determined, like a scientist. The siege of Central Park was meant to be a very important operation to take back control of a very important strategic spot in the middle of New York City. A lot of the Cracker and Warbeasts had turned this big green area that used to be calm into a war zone, where they were building their nests. With Alara's new sonic weapon technology helping them, the rebels got ready for what would be a decisive battle. Marcus, who was in charge of the operation, worked closely with Captain Lana Rhodes to make sure that the military and civilian troops worked together. As part of the plan, teams with sonic emitters and heavy artillery were to be stationed at all the main exits to the park. Drones with thermal imaging flew over, sending real-time information about the animals' moves. Remember how important time is. Marcus told his teams about the news through a secure route. These critters will be confused when the sonic attack starts, but they'll get back to normal quickly. We need to be quick and direct. As night fell, the process began. In the first step, the sound generators were placed around the edges of Central Park. Set up on tripods and watched over by highly armed soldiers, these things started making a high-pitched, almost inaudible noise that went toward the middle of the park. The result happened right away. Some of the animals stumbled, clearly confused and upset by the noise that was messing with their senses. Marcus called for the second part, a full-scale attack, once the beast was confused. Along with EDF troops, resistance fighters rushed forward. Explosions lit up the night as grenades and homemade bombs were used to move the animals to kill zones that had already been set up. Ilara, who was watching the operation from a mobile command unit, kept a close eye on how well the sound weapons were working. By changing the emitter's frequency and amplitude in real time, she was very important in keeping the upper hand. Her face was lit up by screens, and she kept her focus as she told the field teams about changes. On emitter 3, change the frequency to 15 Ch. She told the technician, "It's not fully engaging one of the targets." The technician then told the team at the northern edge of the park what to do. The fight was going on the ground. Marcus and his team made their way through the thick bushes. They were led with great accuracy and came across a very big animal whose scales sparkled in the light from the explosion. The sound waves temporarily slowed it down, but it started to recover and charge up again. Marcus told his sharpshooters to focus their fire when he saw a weak spot near the animal's belly. The beast stumbled, fell, and didn't get back up. When dawn came, parts of Central Park that had been green were scarred by the fight of the night, but the operation had been a huge success. The rebels and the EDF were able to get rid of all the warbeasts in the park, which was a big win. By noon, the area was declared safe, and EDF engineers and medical teams moved in to set up temporary camps and treat the wounded. Central Park's success was a turning point. It turned out that the sonic weapons worked, and they also made the human troops much more motivated. As soon as word got out about the win, other resistance groups in the city and beyond were inspired to use Ilara's technology in similar ways. As Marcus and Captain Rhodes looked at the damage after the attack, they shared a moment of quiet thought. Marcus said as he looked out over the park, "This is just the beginning, but it's a good one." Captain Rhodes agreed and nodded. "I think we have a real chance now because of you, your team, and Ilara's smarts." People would remember the siege of Central Park not only as a tactical win, but also as an example of how strong and creative people can be when the odds are against them. It gave people new hope that the city and maybe even the whole Earth could be taken back from the aliens. Both the civilian resistance and the Earth Defense Force got a big boost in confidence from the win in Central Park, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. After the attack, as troops got back together and made plans for more operations, scary rumors started to spread among the soldiers. There were rumors of sabotage, as important supplies went missing and contacts were blocked for no clear reason. After years of fighting, Captain Lana Rhodes was already wary, but she could feel that something more evil was going on. She started a quiet study because she was worried that someone in the EDF might be working against them. Lana asked Lieutenant A.O. Kamathi, a trusted intelligence officer known for his care and critical skills, to help her. Io started to figure out the patterns of mischief by connecting them to logs of who was there and when and how they got in. Major Evan Kessler, a high-ranking logistics officer who had full access to both tactical data and supply lines, was a surprising suspect that the police found. Kessler had been a well-liked and respected EDF member with a record that seemed spotless and awards for bravery. In reality, though, he had problems with the EDF's leaders and had been secretly talking to the Craterans, which none of his friends knew about. Kessler saw the Cratering force as the clear winners and tried to join what he thought was the winning side because he wanted to succeed personally and was unhappy with Earth's government. To get information that can't be argued with, Lana and Ao set a trap. They lied to Kessler about a big supply of weapons so they could find out where it went. As expected, someone tampered with the shipment, and Ao's team caught Kessler in the act of rerouting the goods to a place known for Cratering activity while they were watching from behind. When the proof was shown to Kessler, he was arrested and put in front of a military court. During his questioning, he told shocking information about how he talked to the Craterans. He gave them critical information about Earth's defenses and where key assets were located, such as specifics about the sonic weapons. It was a big blow to the EDF, especially to Captain Rhodes, who had trusted Kessler and seen him as a friend. Because of what happened, the EDF has tighter security measures in place to stop future leaks and a thorough screening process for new employees. At the same time, Marcus and Alara were both angry and determined when they heard about the betrayal. Marcus made the rebellion safer because he was afraid that similar threats were among his own people. Alara, on the other hand, was worried about the safety of her study, so she made her communications, especially with Doctor, more encrypted. Heinrich about the work they are still doing on the Scent project. There was a good side to the deception as well. It was found that there were more Criterion sympathizers in human organizations besides just the military after the crackdown. The opposition and the EDF became stronger and more united after this purge, which helped to strengthen Earth's defenses. The war against the Crateran attackers moved into a new phase as Earth's forces got stronger against both internal and external threats. The betrayal was a harsh warning of how much was at stake and how complex a plan was needed to fight an enemy that was always watching and changing. Even though it was painful, the humans learned something that brought them together and made them more determined than ever to protect their world at all costs. When they found out that someone betrayed them, the Earth Defense Force, EDF, and the civilian rebellion led by Marcus became more alert and united. Getting rid of people who supported the Crateran had made security stricter and built trust among the remaining members. After taking care of their own problems, they turned their attention back to the real danger, the Crateran Warbeasts that were still roaming the city and causing chaos. Alara worked hard on the next part of her project, making a pheromone-based weapon that might turn the beasts against each other, after she had polished her designs for sonic weapons. Together with Dr. Heinrich, she made a prototype pheromone compound that was meant to make the Warbeasts act aggressively, which led to misunderstanding and fighting within their own group. Captain Lana Rhodes knew that Alara's new weapon could change the way the fight was going, so she planned an operation to use the pheromones in sonic emitters all over the city. The plan, called Echo Storm, was to use the sound devices to herd the animals into certain areas so that the pheromone could be spread widely. The plan was big and needed a lot of different parts of the EDF and the resistance to work together perfectly. Marcus was in charge of operations on the ground. He put together teams to take care of the emitters and put the pheromone dispersal units in key spots. When the operation started at dusk, it was easier to see because the war beasts are active at night. As the first phase began, the sonic transmitters were turned on and waves of confusing sound frequencies were sent out. These led the scared and confused animals to Times Square, which was picked as the operations hub because it is a large open space and a key location. Once there was enough focus among the beasts, the second part began. Technicians from the EDF flew drones over the creatures that had gathered and released clouds of the synthetic pheromone. The reaction happened right away and was very strong. Already tense from the sound attack, the war beasts started to attack each other because of the caused hyperaggression. Animal roars and clashes filled the air, making the Crateran lines look like they were in a mess. Captain Rhodes kept an eye on the action from her command post. Her face was a mask of concentration. Communications were constantly buzzing as news came in from all over the world. The operation was working, but the win did not come for free. Several teams said they faced strong resistance, and as they fought the beasts to keep them in the designated areas, more and more people were killed. In the meantime, Alara and Dr. Heinrich watched from afar how the scent changed the beast's behavior. Even though the first results looked good, both experts knew that more tests and changes were needed to make the compound work better for future uses. At the end of Echo Storm, there were a lot fewer craters and warbeasts in Times Square, which was used as a battleground. Many had been killed by their own kind because of the pheromone-induced panic, and others were unable to move because of the constant sonic attacks. As cleanup workers and medical teams moved in to help the hurt and figure out how bad the damage was, a cautious optimism spread among the people who were fighting. The successful use of Alara's creative weapons gave things a much-needed boost, showing that people could come up with solutions to problems that seemed impossible to solve. The conflict changed course after this win. The humans had not only greatly reduced the threat of the war beasts, but they had also shown that they could think ahead and get around the Crateran attackers. Even though the battle for New York wasn't over yet, people on Earth felt real hope for the first time since the invasion began. They believed they could take back their world. As dawn broke over New York, which had been through a lot, the air was thick with both hope and fear. Operation Echo Storm was a huge success, and it was a very important win for Earth's defenses. The war was still going on, though. Reports from intelligence agencies showed that the Craterons were getting ready to use their last group of warbeasts in a desperate attempt to keep their position on Earth. People thought this fight would be the fiercest yet because it would likely decide the city's fate in the end. As a result, Captain Lana Rhodes called a strategy meeting with Marcus, who was speaking for the civilian opposition, and other important military leaders. The meeting was tense because everyone felt like a fight was going to happen soon. "We backed them into a corner, and now they're attacking us with everything they have," Lana said, referring to satellite images that showed groups of war beast reinforcements moving toward the edges of the city. "Now is our chance to end it in any way we want." Marcus agreed with a firm nod. He was battle-hardened and determined. "They are now under our control. Don't stop now. The people in my country are ready to join the EDF. We're going to give it our all." The two-pronged defense plan was made. The EDF would protect the main battle areas, and Marcus's resistance fighters would use guerrilla tactics and provide assistance. The Lara helped by improving the sound generators and giving them more pheromone charges, making sure that they used all of their tools to make their defenses as strong as possible. The city's guards took their places as the crater and beasts got closer, their shapes visible in the distance. Many people thought this would be the last fight, and the streets of Times Square were still dirty from the fight the night before. The beasts were especially angry because their masters on the Crateran ship orbiting Earth were in a desperate state. The first fight was very rough. The heavy weapons of the EDF roared to life, firing volleys of explosive rounds into the lines of moving warbeasts. While this was going on, the sonic emitters that were put around the battle zones whirred and buzzed, throwing off the beasts and stopping their coordinated attacks. The Lara watched how the pheromone affected the animals and told drones to drop the chemical into the groups of animals that were together the most. They started fighting with each other, which caused chaos in their lines and made them less effective. Every day, the fight went on all day. Fireworks, blasts, and the creepy sounds of the sonic devices could be heard all over the streets. Marcus and his fighters quickly moved like shadows, setting traps and attacking the animals from hidden spots. They had a big advantage because they knew the city so well. As night fell, a very important moment came. A very big and clearly improved warbeast, maybe the leader of the beast forces and a Crateran, attacked directly the main EDF barrier. It had thicker armor than the others, and it looked like regular guns couldn't hurt it. Marcus made a smart choice when he saw this. He moved behind the beast with a group of his best fighters while Lana kept it confused with a focused sound attack. As Marcus got closer, he carried a specially made explosive, which Alara had made as a last option weapon to break through the beast's armor. Marcus placed the bomb on the animal at just the right time. The explosion was so big that it finally killed the monster and brought down the morale of the troops in Crater that were still alive. It took a while, but the last of the warbeasts fell or ran away, and the fight slowly turned in their favor. When the Crateran ship saw that it had lost, it stopped attacking, probably to think about why its plan had failed. After what would become known as the last stand of Times Square, the city was both tired and relieved. Both military and citizen defenders hugged and told stories with faces that showed they were tired but also had the clear glow of victory. As the cleanup began, Captain Rhodes and Marcus stood next to each other and looked out over the city they had fought so hard to defend. "Yes, Marcus, we did it. We did it," Lana said with a lot of feeling in her voice. Marcus looked out over the city with a sad but proud face. "We did, yes. We are now rebuilding together." This win was more than just a military one. It showed how strong the human spirit is, how creative their plans were, and how brave they were as they fought not only to stay alive, but also for their home. New York slowly started to let out the breath of stress it had been holding for far too long after the big fight in Times Square. The Craterans finally pulled back their forces after seeing their last best beasts die and realizing that Earth's defenses were stronger and smarter than they thought. Once cloudy because of the alien ship's shadow, the sky became clear as it disappeared into space, a silent admission of loss. Once the immediate threat was gone, attention turned to getting better and starting over. Even though the city was scarred and partly destroyed, it was busy with work to rebuild it. Crews worked nonstop to clean up the mess and get basic services back up and running. Along with rebuilding the city's buildings, its people were also healing emotionally as they thought about the pain and loss they had been through. Captain Lana Rhodes, who is now seen as a hero, was put in charge of the brand new New York Defense Command, which is supposed to keep the city safe and ready for any future threats. Her guidance during the crisis was very helpful, and now she was in charge of keeping her city safe so that no one would be caught off guard again. Marcus, who had become a sign of bravery and smarts among civilians, worked closely with Lana. He helped make the civilian resistance networks part of the city's official security system. People were trained in guerrilla methods that were developed during the invasion. This helped them not only protect their homes but also become an important part of the city's ongoing security measures. Ilara, whose scientific work had been so important to the win, now focused on helping people learn more about alien biology and technologies. She started the Earth Advanced Research Network with Dr. Heinrich and other experts to study the remains of the crater as well as biology and technology. Her work used to only be about defense, but now it also looks into bigger questions like where humans fit in the universe and whether we might meet other alien cultures in the future, whether in a hostile or peaceful way. After thinking about the crisis, the government passed the Earth Unity Act, which is meant to make it easier for countries to work together on defense and study. As the conflict center, New York played home to the first Global Unity Conference. There, leaders from all over the world made plans for a single planetary defense system, inspired by how people worked together when the city was at its worst. As things got back to normal, the city held a memorial service in Central Park, which was now fully restored to its former green beauty. Thousands of people came together to remember those who died in the attack. Lana, Marcus, and other important people who had led them through the crisis spoke. At the end of the event, a monument was unveiled that showed two human hands holding up the earth as a symbol of how strong and united people are. People stayed in the park after the service to talk about their hopes for the future and play with their kids. There was a palpable sense of renewal and potential in the air. Ilara stood a little farther back from the crowd and looked at the families with a serious face. "Hey, doctor." Heinrich came over and gave her a hot cup of coffee. To the happy scene in front of them, he said, "A new beginning." Ilara said, "Yes, a new beginning." Her eyes were as deep blue as the sky in the early evening. "We now know a lot more about what we can do and what we can handle. It's now time to talk about what we can become." Their talk turned to the projects they had coming up, but they both knew what they were really saying. People had not only lived, but they had also changed. They were moving into a future with new hopes, challenges, and a better sense of their own power and unity.